Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, it's great to be here. Thank you so much again, Jane Joe, for inviting me and, and making it super convenient for me because, I had been on tap to come over to Livingston today, but, I mentioned to you that I've been asked to come and do a presentation in my children's school over here at Montfortin. And so, thanks for giving me the opportunity to go ahead and follow through with that. And so, I've spoken last time I got started speaking, and then my internet must have gone out or something. And so I wasn't able to complete, but I've been to the building there in Livingston and for the movement course. And so I am familiar a little bit with your area and everything. And so ASPEN, some of the goals that ASPEN seeks is to just be a community connector, right? And then kind of like a support network for people throughout the local community. Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. And, I just think that's so important. Had an interesting conversation with a guy today from MSU. We were talking about community and support networks, support systems, and how critically important they are to people's quality of life. And so thank you for the great work that you're doing over there. And I'm happy to help contribute some of my knowledge about a topic that I've been researching and thinking and talking about for a long time. And so the title, I wanted to focus my presentation today on just overall wellness and how, what I understand as a ceremonial way of life here on the Northern Plains and in the region really can add a lot to your overall sense of well-being and just sense of cohesiveness. So now what I want to do is I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Okay. So here's an image that was taken from Billings. These same lodges were set up here in Bozeman in October, and they stood up on Pete's Hill for 10 days. And so Mountain Time Arts is a group that I work with here in Bozeman, and we do a lot of performance art events. We've been doing them for several years. And this past summer, we did a big event along the Yellowstone River down on the West Creek Ranch. And so we did 3 shows of the Act 2 of our opera, Snow Chronicles of Heatwave. So that's just a little background on Mountain Time Arts. I would encourage you to come check out our website. We're at mountaintimearts.org. We have on tap next summer, we have some big monumental performance art pieces that we're going to do in the Yellowstone Park. And want to also at the same time probably set up a teepee village in the Yellowstone Park that will have at least 7 teepees, as you see here, and potentially more. So we want to do a display like this, except it will be an interactive teepee village at the Yellowstone Park this summer, and Mountain Time Arts is going to help with that. As I mentioned, I'm a senior advisor for Mountain Time Arts, but I'm also an assistant producer and performer. So I sing and narrate and help design our shows. And so I don't know if anyone was able to catch our show this summer at the West Creek Ranch, south of Livingston, south of Immigrant. But it was, I think it was pretty successful. I think it was really well received, and it was just really wonderful to be along the Yellowstone River. This is another view along the Yellowstone River, actually, except in Billings. And so, of course, the Yellowstone River goes right through Billings, at least on the southern edge of the city. And then these rim rocks here are, the river passes through them, as does the interstate and all the traffic, trains and everything. And then up here on the rims is the airport. And so when they set these teepees up, it was during the COVID Christmas, which sounds like a cool movie title, A Very COVID Christmas. Actually, not very cool. It was pretty depressing and tragic. But anyway, these lodges were set up to, I guess, help lift the spirits and to honor the people who had lost their lives to COVID-19 and also were fighting the disease and also working to keep their communities safe through, masks and everything else, distancing, and supporting their local healthcare providers through all that. So that's what these teepees were for. And they were just a phenomenal success. And people came to them like it ended up being like a place of healing for a lot of people. The traffic that winter up on the rims for people to come up there and look at the teepees was nonstop. And, especially in the evening when they light up, they have these LED lights that they put in them, and then they can change colors too. So just like blinking Christmas lights, they would go from red to blue to green. And they're really compelling when you're there on site, experiencing them in the evening. Really kind of a mystical, magical experience. And people would come and they would place a rock around the lodge, and sometimes they would write their loved one's name on the rock if they had lost their lives to COVID-19 or just somehow died that season. So there were prayer rocks placed around all the lodges. Then at the end of 10 days, they came and they took down the lodges, and
this is the challenge.
The only thing that was left was the rock circles. And I really felt like it was a beautiful symbol of Montana and the ancient way of life here, and the way of life that all of us here that live here have an inkling of. And that is, we live here on this landscape, and when we die, what we leave behind are literally just rocks and bones. And and that's what has kept this place so beautiful and pristine and perfect for thousands of years. The water, the landscape, the forests, the animals, the air. It was all because of a way of life that was sustainable, that was light on the land, and that was ceremonial. That the spiritual aspects of the human condition were the emphasis of this particular way of life. And the people who lived here for thousands of years
has been
really I lost my train of thought. The folks who lived here and lived in these kinds of lodges here for thousands of years believed that the highest form of understanding the human condition was through a spiritual lens, or through the spiritual experience, because they saw how physical and mental and all those things associated with the physical world were temporary and passing, but understood the spirit to be, forever. And So that was some of the beliefs that continue to exist here in Plains Indian culture, and part of the reason why so many of the ceremonies and ways of life are still present and still impactful in the communities. Take a quick look at my chat here. Oh yeah, yep. So Kelly said she went and saw these in Bozeman. So in Bozeman, there were thousands of people. There were like, probably upwards of 4,000 to 5,000 people that went and saw the teepees during the 10 days that they were here on Pete's Hill. And it could have been well beyond that as well. When they had the day, the Indigenous People Day, when they dedicated it, the lodges, there were like 350 people there just for that one event. And I know all throughout the week that there was a steady crowd and people really enjoyed them. And a lot of people, commented over social media that it was such a nice addition to Bozeman, and, they were sorry to see them go. And, they're really, they had made an impact. And what's so interesting is that there really wasn't anything other than just the teepees up there and the lights. So it was really, really simple. It's not like there was any kind of play or song and dance or narration. I mean, there was no performance. It was just the teepees, but just the teepees alone were enough to really transfix our community for about 10 days. And people just, taking their children there, they were open to the public to walk inside and, to just enjoy the quiet serenity, the elegance of a teepee. There's nothing quite so elegant as that lodge, the way it stands straight and erect, against the wind, and with the streamers from the tips of the poles. The streamers are placed on there for a lot of reasons. For one reason is so that birds won't sit on there and nest or try to roost on there, and then you end up getting bird poop on your lodge. And then also during the day when the streamers are blowing in the wind, they cast a shadow on the ground, and that shadow can oftentimes dissuade small animals, rodents, and snakes from getting close to your lodge. So there was some utilitarian purposes in those things that they hung from the top there. In the old days, I think the streamers were probably just buckskin that they had cut. But nowadays they like to use red. But again, it's this spiritual quality of the essence of that way of life, and the understanding that these lodges, these dwellings are just so ephemeral. They're here one moment and they're gone the next. And even if you all you'd have to do is kick the rocks away and no one would know that you were there. The grass might be flattened a little bit. But, just thinking, if human beings want to survive, another 12,000 years on our planet, we're certainly not going to get there at the rate we're on right now. And so we're going to have to, I believe, embrace and find joy in the simple things in life that that are also sustainable. And so, thinking about maybe setting teepees like this up in Livingston, where would you set them up at? And the wind blows so hard in Livingston, to see the lodges there standing against those fierce winds. I think it would be kind of inspiring to see that, really, and the streamers blowing in the wind. Maybe we could consider doing that at some point. Maybe the Blank Foundation would want to help finance setting the teepees up in Livingston for 10 days at some point. Livingston is such an important place, really in the context of Plains Indian life, much more important than say like Bozeman, because it was right there on the river and it was the entrance into the Yellowstone Park area where there were numerous trade items and nations that could be, interacted with and harvested. And so it was a place of great wealth and value. So everyone went through there. And so, it would be nice to have something in Livingston at some point. Yeah, yep. Nice comments. I think one thing to consider or think about is just where would we put them? Usually, while here in Bozeman and in Billings, they were up on the hill. But they had locations in both areas that were just, ideal for that. Livingston might be a little different, but I'm sure that, with a little brainstorming, we could probably figure something out. But again, just want to say, how such a simple thing can be so profound and can be so inspiring and healing to so many people. Not just, of course, to Native people, but to non-Native people and for those relationships together as well. So I encourage something like this, a display like this throughout Montana. And also, again, encourage you to come next summer to the Yellowstone Park for the Mountain Time Arts exhibit. So this is the medicine wheel. The one that we know of as being world famous, and there's a national landmark there. It's over in the Bighorn Mountains, and it's been used for probably 6,000 years. That's probably as far back as we know for sure. It could be older, and there are numerous types of these types of wheels, sizes, and but typically about the same general shape. But there are over 100 of these structures here found throughout the Northern Plains. And when I was talking, or when I had to give a little narration this past summer for our standby snow play down there on the river, and I talked about the rocks and how, the Native people here around Livingston and like the Paradise Valley area, as you go south from Livingston, it has the highest concentration of drive lines pretty much anywhere else in the world. And a drive line is, there are rock lines on the ground, like these spokes where people have lined up the rocks along the ground in a line. In Livingston, or in the Paradise Valley, there are 60 miles worth of rock lines that have been identified by archaeologists. And the reason why there were so many rock lines that had been built there over the years was because all of the bison that passed through the Paradise Valley seasonally could be easily harvested by with a little bit of knowledge and with a little bit of infrastructure. And the infrastructure are the rock lines. And as it turns out, the bison are very well behaved and they like to stay inside the lines. And they don't want to put their foot over something that they might get stuck in. And think about the concept of cattle guard. Why we have cattle guards and why cows never step in them, because they come close and they see that their feet might go in there. Eventually, people in Montana got so smart that we figured and finally realized that we actually don't need a cattle guard. We just need to paint some lines on the ground, and the cows will think it's a cattle guard. And that's basically what these rock lines were, the drive lines. They were like painted lines on the ground. And they would, the Native people historically would herd the bison along the lines and direct them towards areas where they could be easily harvested and then processed. So cleaned out and gutted and everything else that you would do after you killed an animal. So we have those. We have the like I say, there's only one other place I think in South Africa that might have a higher concentration of drivelines that ancient Africans used to herd gazelles or one of those ungulates over there. But outside of that, Paradise Valley, as far as what has been surveyed, is the most intensive place for herding bison with rocks. And we also know from my experience as a Plains Indian, as a Crow Indian, that people go to Paradise Valley all the time from around the state to harvest rocks for the sweat lodge. Because there's a lot of like volcanic type of rocks in the Paradise Valley. There's quarries there, there's lava rocks, and there's also basalt. And there's a lot in the Paradise Valley. And so Crow Indians have been coming to the Paradise Valley for a very long time. They've never stopped to collect rocks for their sweat lodge ceremony. The reason why the rocks are valuable is because they can heat them up to extreme temperatures over a fire, bring them into the lodge, pour water over them, and they don't disintegrate and burst and break. They're able to expand and contract with heat and then, water being poured on them. So we have those rocks that are sacred and ceremonial. And then we know that this whole Paradise Valley area is filled with arrowheads and ancient axes and knives and glass rock, the obsidian that comes from Obsidian Cliff down in the park that is spread all the way down the Mississippi River into Cahokia for thousands of miles. The obsidian from the Yellowstone Park was traded all throughout the continent. And so we have rocks for harvesting bison. We have rocks for processing the bison. We have rocks for praying for the bison, praying for a better life, the sweat lodge rocks. We have rocks to keep our teepees around, the flaps of our teepees to the ground. So we have teepee ring rocks. And then we have rocks that are used for both ceremony and science. And that's what this represents. This is a synthesis of a ceremonial way of thinking about the world and a mathematical and scientific understanding of nature coming together in one structure. So this could be used to measure the seasons, the solstices, the equinoxes, by paying attention to where the sun, the moon, different stars rise in correlation to the lines within the circle. But it could also be used as the basis for a Sundance ceremony, which is the oldest and most common community ceremony here on the Northern Plains. It's an extremely difficult physical ceremony where people, do not eat or drink water for 4 days while dancing in the hot sun. So I don't know of anyone else in the world who does a ceremony like that. But it's based on this particular rock structure here. And so rocks in so many ways represent and are symbolic of this ancient way of life that, did not have to destroy or dominate or conquer, but rather just accommodated themselves and learned to use the most available objects, the rocks, to live a way of life that was light on the land and that could be sustained for 12,000 years and beyond. So that's the reason why I like to talk about Medicine Mill country. We know that these wheels, once you get outside the northern plains, they're not found anymore. You know, as you go south down towards the southwest or across the mountains onto the plateau or up far north into Canada, where the trees and the brush are thick, then the wheels are no longer viable. They don't work the same way anymore. We don't have people that live in those ecosystems don't have the same constant view of the night sky like we do here in Montana, and the day sky. So, you know, the sky is a part of our life here in Montana, thus big sky country. And all of that, again, allows and is the essential element for the medicine wheel way of life, which is a seasonal way of life based on the harvesting of wild resources. So I'm going to pause and, you know, since we were talking about the land acknowledgement, I thought I would kind of share this map as well. For those of you who are not familiar with this map, this is pretty common in most classrooms in Montana, public school classrooms, because of Montana's Indian Education for All law, which requires all public schools to teach about the distinct and unique heritage of Native people. And so this map is kind of like handed out really to most schools through the Office of Public Instruction in Helena. And the colors, the outlines here are identified with the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty. And so you can kind of see that Montana was pretty much all Indian country in 1851. And over here in the Gallatin Valley where I live, it was kind of a common hunting ground, but was at least as far as the federal government was concerned. Actually, pretty much all this was a common hunting ground, the entire state. But I think it's kind of useful to look at the map because we can kind of get a sense of who was coming into the Paradise Valley, who was coming through Livingston, and it was pretty much everybody on this map. You know, they really traveled a long ways, even on foot. So you can see the original Crow Indian Reservation included Livingston, went all the way up to the Musselshell River, way up here to where the Musselshell comes into the Missouri, and then all the way over to Miles City. So over 30 million acres. Now it's down to here, it's 2.3 million. And a lot of the land is not owned by Crow Indians, actually. But again, just wanted to provide a little bit of data, a little bit of historical background on the boundaries, where they were and where they are currently. Oops. And you can see, I kind of like to use these three maps as a nice comparison. Again, this was the 1850 treaty. This treaty was signed because of the gold rush to California. And one of the gentlemen who encouraged the U.S. government to enter into treaty negotiations was Jim Bridger, of course, famous here in Bozeman for his pizza place. I mean, his trail that he brought people to. Now there is, of course, a pizza place named after him that is also a brewery. But I'm not sure if they took the name from the mountain range and not him, or it's hard to say. But anyway, Jim Bridger encouraged this treaty here because he understood that the Plains Indians were a militarized group, and that they had acquired horses and rifles, and that they were, an exceedingly skilled light infantry, and that the best way to handle any kind of opposition from them was to negotiate and make promises to them. And so that's how this treaty was signed here in 1850. Then the gold was discovered in Virginia City about 13 years later. And so, and you can see in this 1850 map that there was no pass that went to California at the time. Everyone was going through Wyoming. So that's the reason why the government was happy to divide Montana up into Indian country. And it wasn't until gold was discovered in Virginia City that the treaty was changed by the government. Then you can see things start to shrink up pretty good. And then over the next 50 years or so, they become really small. This map here is about 30 years old, but it kind of gives you a sense of the population off the reservations. This is Billings, Bozeman. I think Bozeman's probably even more now. This is Helena, Great Falls, Missoula, Kalispell, Havre. So these areas where you see Native people living off the reservation because of housing conditions and shortages on the reservation. And here in the Gallatin and over around Livingston, there are a number of Crow Indians, and actually all different tribes here in Bozeman, but not probably as big a population as we might think or expect. As I mentioned before, the Plains Indian way of life was seasonal and migrational. They traveled from winter campsites to summer campsites, and understanding that the need to be near water and firewood and protection from the wind was going to be their key to survival. Now, today in Montana, pretty much every single town, city is located along a river. So really no different from the historic Native people's winter campsites. It was only in the summer where they would travel over the open plains and prairies and rendezvous with one another for trade. And what made all of this lifestyle possible was this intermigration of mountains and prairie. So we can see that as you leave the Rocky Mountain front and head towards the east, say from Helena, you come across many island mountain ranges. There are the big belts here, the little belts, the castles, the crazy mountains, the big snowy mountains, the the Judiths, the high woods. Over here you have the Bear Paw, or maybe that was the Little Rockies and the Bear Paw over here. As you head further south, you have the Bull Mountains here. You have the Pryor Mountains. You have the Bighorn Mountains. Over here, you have the Wolf Teeth Mountains. Right over here, you have the Black Hills. So all of these mountains and hills that lay outside of the Rocky Mountain front are actually surrounded by prairie. So in Montana, you have a mixture of prairie and mountain. The reason why that's important for Plains Indian life is because this is where the teepee poles are harvested. And without teepee poles, there are no teepees, and there's no way to really survive on the northern plains. And so the teepee poles were literally the backbone of the communities. And because they were in proximity of the grassy ranges where the bison were at, this became a mecca for Plains Indian way of life. More so than as you move down south out onto the plains of like Colorado, you don't see the same type of availability for lodgepole pines. And so this was the place to be here in Montana. And also you see this little area here. This is the Judith Gap. There's a wind that blows through there. The white people have noticed, so they went ahead and put up a wind farm over there. And I guess it does pretty good. the wind, it always blows through that little gap. In the old days, for thousands of years, this northern herd of bison would get funneled through that little gap. The reason why they knew about the gap was because they don't see very well, but they smell really good. And the wind would blow the smell of the grass into their noses, and they would follow that into the wind right through this gap here, now down in front of the crazy mountains, and they could take either one of two trails. There was one that went over towards Billings and around Laurel. They call it the Old Bison Trail. And that's the one that the Nez Perce took in 1877 when they were fleeing from the army. Or there was a trail here that went down in front of the crazy mountains, circled down here in front of the Yellowstone River, and lured them down into the Yellowstone Park. So this is an ancient migration pathway for bison. And all of the nations of this area understood that if there was no bison anywhere else, there would be some here. So this is kind of where the Plains Indian Sign Language is developed, and the kind of the cosmopolitan intertribal nature of the region is established over the course of generations, thousands of years. And the people begin to realize and understand that this is a wealthy landscape. And even though, it's a difficult landscape to survive on, and it can be harsh, it is rich. And it's rich not just with, wild natural resources in abundance, but also with a spiritual quality unlike any other place. Visually, it's stunning, at all times of the year. And the mountains provide the kind of solitude and a ceremonial type of place that really help to emphasize and mark that ceremonial way of life for Plains Indians. So kind of like, in a way, like the Tibetans and, the ones who live in the high mountain areas, they have a, they are concerned with the spiritual well-being of their communities and themselves. I'm not sure what all the factors are that lead to that, but there's certainly a correlation, I think. And so I love looking at these maps and thinking about where people were, where they spent the winter, where they traveled at during the summer. When they traveled during the summer, during the era before horses, they didn't take teepee poles with them. I think there's been this misunderstanding that dogs could drag teepee poles for Native people thousands of years ago, but I don't think that's accurate. Instead, they would leave their poles at their winter campsite in an area that was protected, and they would, make their summer travel plans. And as they would travel over the open prairie, rather than bring teepee poles along with them, they would have dogs, or they themselves would carry, emergency shelters, like little hides or what have you, in case a storm arose over the prairie and they needed some immediate shelter and they were out in the open, exposed. They would have something there with them. Then as they made their way to their rendezvous site, it was likely another mountain range. That's where they could either harvest new poles and establish a summer camp, or use poles that they had left the summer before. And so there was a lot of migration and making the best use of where the resources were already at, so you don't have to take them along with you. And even that idea, I think, of dogs dragging poles, it just, it's not going to work. They can carry a small amount of weight, but other than that, they're not going to want to drag anything for you, and they're not going to be able to do it at the same pace that you can walk. And so that's not going to really behoove you if you're, traveling across the land. Okay, just going to check the chats real quick. Oh yeah, the north side soccer fields. About the stakes ruining the turf. Yeah, that's an issue. You could get like pins. Oh yeah, thanks, Kelly. See ya. Good to see ya. Okay, just gonna keep moving on here. So again, I referred to the Plains Indians over here on the Northern Plains as a cosmopolitan region. It's really true. There was so many different languages here. And that's one, I think, the mysteries that anthropologists continue to explore and actually kind of struggle with. How was it that so many different languages were developed here on the continent, and seemingly not a very long period of time? And what was the driving, need? What was the driving cause to create these different languages? Some of the texts that I put in here talk about, the Plain Sign Language. It was over 44 different nations that utilized that because they were, kind of out there on their own. Everybody was. You think about it, it's kind of an equalizer in a way. Let's say you have 12 different groups and no one speaks the same language. Who has the advantage there? And what kind of advantage is it? I don't think that there was a resource scarcity. And so people were not fighting over different things here in the old days. In fact, they were trying to figure out how to communicate with each other, and they worked so hard at it for so long, generation after generation after generation, that they finally established a sign language that was really unprecedented and has never been achieved before, or will ever again, not in this modern day and age. So that's in and of itself a mysterious process. I'm not sure which one's more mysterious, the creating all those languages to begin with, or circling back and making a universal sign language so that everyone can understand one another. I mean, they're all really, in my mind, startling evidence of some really monumental communication achievements. And it's going to be a long time, and people are going to be studying that well into the future. So again, not to belabor too much, but again, the ceremonial way of life that people value, not the material possessions, but their connections to one another, their connections to the spirits, their connections to the land, their connections to the animals, the connections that their body may have to their spirit. From a lens of connectivity, it's pretty easy to see that the world is filled with all of these different looking and, ostensibly or presumably unique things. But underneath it all, there's this common thread. And I think that kind of intuitive knowledge or seeking of that, to be operating from that sensibility, is how the Plains Indian ceremonial way of life was able to continue on for so long, because there's so much truth, inherent truth, and what they believed, and how they understood the nature of the world. So, not being able to really farm, on one sense, kind of allows them to appreciate the gifts of Mother Earth rather than this desire or need or seeking to dominate or conquer or completely change in order to fit our desires. So there's that. Those are like some deep concepts, but I think that they're worth considering, and they are part of some of the most important questions that we ask is in our communities. This is my dad, my stepdad. He passed away, almost exactly a year now. He passed away the week before Thanksgiving last year. And he was quite a guy. He was, I think I might have mentioned this when I was over in Livingston that time. Here's the sweat lodge that he used to pour water in. He's standing in front of it. He's got his chainsaw there. He's going to cut up some sweat wood probably. And so that sweat lodge there is used a lot, and it's continued to be used today. Of course, now that he's gone, the family continues to use it and builds a new one. Every year they build a new lodge. You can see all the blankets and tarps over the top, meant to secure in the steam. And the steam is meant to cleanse the mind and body. And then right over there along the edge of the frame here, we see the banks, the steep cut bank of the Little Bighorn River. And so, after the sweat lodge, you can go and get in the water and, wash yourself, wash your body, and just be more at one with nature, and to relieve the stress, and to, again, for Native understanding, praying is good for everything and everybody. When we pray for others, we help ourselves, we help them, not just spiritually, but physically, mentally. And so that was kind of, some of the lessons I learned from him that had been passed down to him from his elders as well. So kind of oral tradition passed on down the line. What this says here, ahogashila, that means thank you very much. And it's kind of again, it's a sensibility, it's a value, being thankful, having gratitude and expressing that, and finding that inside yourself and wanting to, again, dwell in that space of gratitude. That's a good place to be. There's nothing wrong with that. If you, like so many of us, all of us have healing that you want to, continue to work on, being thankful for what you do have is the best way to continue your momentum and your growth towards full healing. So, I like to say those words. I like to, try and stay grateful, and kind of keep a ceremonial frame of mind. And so I thought, well, with ASPEN, for all the different things that ASPEN does in the community and seeking to strengthen people's hearts and minds and their friendships and their path forward, I thought it would be a good message. And so, we still have a lot of the same traditions and practice the same ceremonies. I think I did show the same PowerPoint over in Livingston. And you can see my Uncle Henry there, Henry Reelbird, and they're giving away blankets there. Their daughter, Lucy, had graduated college. And so when we have a graduate or someone achieve something in the community, the person gives back to their friends to show them thank you, to say thank you for your support, rather than saying, oh, I did so well, I got my degree, I'm going to have a big party and, you guys can bring me a gift. And there's nothing wrong with that. But this is another way of saying, well, I finished it, I got my degree, but I couldn't have done it without you. And because of that, I want to thank you for what you've contributed to me along the way. And so I'd like to invite you to come and have dinner with us and bring your family. And I want to give you a gift. So that just strengthens, right, the connections, the bonds, the sense of gratitude, faithfulness, and the traditions. This is how communities stay together. Even though we've been through so much over the past 200 years to grow people, there's a lot of things that we've held on to and maintained within our cultural way of life that are pretty beautiful and continue to strengthen us and, keep us moving forward. And so the Native American Church, again, that's kind of more of a modern thing, but it's still very much in the same vein as the old way, before it was called a church, I guess. But you can see behind Henry there, those teepee poles, these ones right here. And these poles will be used for a Native American church ceremony, because the church ceremonies are held within a teepee. And it will be held down here along the river. And it's a difficult but beautiful ceremony. It lasts all night. And so you can hear the water from the river running while you're there at night. It's pretty cool. There's the river. Beautiful photograph of the sweat lodge. This is after the tarps have been taken off. You can see this is where the rocks are. And the Native American church teepee will get set up just over in this area here. This word Ashmaliachala means as the driftwood lodges. So you can see as the wood comes together, it creates a bond that is very difficult to tear apart and provides a home and a shelter for animals and birds. And for those of you who are interested, there's a lot more out there in Indian country and in Montana. If you ever want to go check out powwow on one of the reservations in Montana, I thought I'd put that up there just to let you know. And I think that's about it. And one last chat. Seems to be so much talk about. Yeah. Cooperation with land versus control. Yep. And I think Montana is a big example of that, because we really, we're a dry climate. Right now we're in a major drought. So we have unique circumstances here that we need to appreciate and to really, abide by, I think, because if we try to live outside those lines and everything and do things that are not going to be sustainable here in Montana and don't strengthen the ecosystems and the diversity of the wildlife and, the health of the soils and air, then it's not a good idea. And that's just my perspective on it. But I really
I know.
Close to the end.
We almost made it. Sorry, Shane. Oh, I hope he comes back so we can have questions if necessary.
You know, I was just thinking, I was hoping to ask him a question, so this is a bummer.
Yeah. Let me stop the recording and maybe that will help. I don't know if like the bandwidth